March 26th, Thursday. It's noon in the Ukrainian capital. This is our time. I'll tell you the main news at this hour right now. I'm Seikin Amirzaev. The Russian army continues to cynically shell the peaceful population of Ukraine. Dnipro has once again come under attack by Russian occupiers. There, the invading army attacked a residential building in the central part of the city. One of the drones hit a residential high-rise, and apartments on the second and third floors caught fire. At this time, 5 people are known to have been injured. Residential buildings and a nearby gymnasium were also damaged. In Kharkiv this morning, one of the Russian drones fell between a restaurant and a residential high-rise building. A 65-year-old man was wounded, windows were blown out in nearby high-rises, and cars were damaged. Explosions were also heard this morning in Kryvyi Rih, Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russian army struck an infrastructure facility. According to preliminary reports, no one was injured. Last night, Russian forces again attacked port infrastructure in the south of Odessa region and the city of Izmail with drones. At least one person was injured. This was reported by city authorities. In addition, an energy facility was also hit. Because of the attack, some areas in the region are experiencing power outages. Furthermore, some consumers in the Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Chernihiv, Zaporizhia, and Kharkiv regions have also lost power. As a result of the Russian attack near Romania's river border, one Russian drone crashed on its territory. According to Romania's Ministry of Defense, aircraft were scrambled to monitor the airspace situation. One of the Russian drones crashed 4 kilometers from the border. The wrecked drone was found in an open area. No one was hurt. There was no damage. Over the past night, Russian occupiers launched a total of 153 drones at Ukraine, 100 of which were Shawheads. Air Defense Forces managed to neutralize 130 targets. Ukraine is completely severing ties with the CIS. At the initiative of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, the government has terminated 116 agreements concluded with Russia, Belarus, and within the framework of the Commonwealth of Independent States. According to Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, the main stage of bringing Ukraine's treaty framework in line with the realities of war is essentially coming to an end. I should note that Ukraine stopped participating in the statutory bodies of the CIS back in 2018, but formally remained a party to a number of interstate agreements.
It is my firm belief that Ukraine's legal and treaty framework must reflect the realities of war and the new security architecture on the European continent. To do this, we need to sever the last legal ties that once connected us with Russia, Belarus, and the so-called CIS. This is my principled position as a minister, to get rid of anything that could weaken Ukraine, to cut off everything that once united us with the aggressor state, and to build a serious, strategic, and long-term line of defense for the free world on Ukraine's eastern border, or even better, beyond it. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Sanctions from various countries have directly reduced Russia's capabilities by lowering its revenues from energy sales and increasing its budget deficit. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in an interview with the French publication Le Monde. Zelensky emphasized that it was precisely thanks to these restrictions that the financing of Russia's defense sector was reduced. Easing sanctions on the Russian Federation's energy sector leads to increased revenues for Russia, does not reduce its activity in the war against Ukraine or its support for Iran.
The budget deficit of the Russian Federation has been increasing year after year. The largest deficit occurred at the beginning of 2026. By the end of 2025, the Russians had a deficit of 83 billion plus 19 billion that they carried over to the beginning of 2026. According to our forecasts, for 2026, the deficit was expected to be around 100 billion US dollars. Now, after the easing of sanctions on the Russian Federation's energy sector, specifically on petroleum products, their revenues are measured in billions. This definitely does not contribute to reducing the intensity of hostilities in Ukraine, nor in Iran, because Russia, one way or another, will support the Iranian regime. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Le Monde.
The United Kingdom will intercept and inspect vessels from the Russian Federation's shadow fleet in its waters. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the military has been given the authority to board and detain tankers from Russia's shadow fleet. According to Starmer, this will not only protect the UK, but also deprive the Kremlin's war machine of funding that is being used for the war against Ukraine. Consequently, as a direct result of this, Russian ships trying to avoid interception will have to completely avoid entering British territorial waters, such as the English Channel, which will significantly drive up overall shipping costs.
Putin is rubbing his hands over the war in the Middle East because he believes that higher oil prices will allow him to line his pockets. That's why we're cracking down even harder on his shadow fleet. Not only to protect Britain, but also to deprive Putin's war machine of the dirty profits that fund his barbaric campaign in Ukraine. Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Russia's and China's actions will be monitored from space. This was announced by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius during his visit to Australia. We're talking about an independent global network of sensors and surveillance tools that will make it possible to track what's happening in orbit and promptly detect potential threats. The minister himself called the future architecture a space early warning system. Justifying the project, the head of Germany's defense ministry directly mentioned the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. He stated that both countries have increased their offensive capabilities in space. That's why Berlin and Canberra need to have a better understanding of what's happening in space, so they can protect their own systems. The Russian army has encountered problems with ammunition supplies in the Kupiansk and Lyman directions. At the railway junction near Luhansk, a relay cabinet was completely burned down. This was reported by the partisan movement Atesh. It is reported that this junction was used to transport trains carrying ammunition, components for armored vehicles, and reserves of fuel and lubricants intended to reinforce assault groups on the front line. Now, train traffic on this section is blocked. On March 26th, Ukraine celebrates National Guard Day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky congratulated the National Guard members. He noted that the National Guard is one of the key elements of our defense, actively operating along the entire front line. Since the very first days of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, National Guard soldiers have been defending Ukrainian soil. According to the president, the names of the units speak for themselves. And everyone who hears about Azov or Khartia knows that these are brigades that carry out their combat missions with honor.
The 1st Corps of the National Guard. The 1st Corps of the National Guard, together with our other defense forces, is defending one of the most difficult sectors, the Pokrovsky-Ocheretine direction in Donetsk region. The 2nd Corps is carrying out its missions in the Kharkiv region and doing it exactly as it should be done. The 3rd Brigade of the National Guard, the 18th Slavyansk Brigade, as well as the unmanned units Lasers Group, Omega Wings, and Typhoon, and the fighters of the Omega Special Operations Center. Every name in the National Guard speaks of strength.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.